Oh my goodness, what an intro. Just never going to live up to that. So, as Luke said, this is the second Zero Height Converge I have had the honor to close out. Once again, I am the lady who stands between you all and cold beer. So, if we haven't met, I'm Geri. I'm a design systems and accessibility consultant from London. Rather than bore you with my career history, I thought I would introduce myself using a word cloud that represents my brain. I appreciate this isn't the most inclusive introduction, so to paraphrase, like many design systems professionals, I am just a swirling mass of neurodivergence, anxiety, and introverted weirdness, punctuated by Twilight memes and mediocre puns. So my talk today is called Design Systems Notes in the Margin. After 8 years of exploring the world of design systems, I've embarked on a new journey as lead accessibility specialist at Just Eat. Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to demonstrate how the skills you're all gaining working in design systems are highly transferable and will help you to navigate any new challenge. So the inspiration for this talk came from rediscovering a stack of old Choose Your Own Adventure books. Like many kids growing up in the 80s, I was obsessed with these books. If you've never experienced the joy of reading one, they present you with choices, and by following different pathways, you can choose a different ending. This is what interactive entertainment looked like before the internet was invented, kids. Reading these books as an adult, they are charmingly free of internal logic. The most bizarre and unsettling read was this book called Hyperspace. Now, this has nothing to do with design systems, but if you'll afford me just 2 minutes of nostalgia, I have to share this absolute banger of a story with you. So, this creepy old dude called Professor Zinker moves in next door and tries to lure you into his house with a book about hyperspace. Rather than calling Childline, like kids would today, back in the 80s it was perfectly acceptable to run into some old guy's house alone for some secret adventures. Instead of entering hyperspace, hyperspace enters Professor Zinker. These days, there are probably OnlyFans sites for that type of activity. The story then takes an Inception-style plot twist where you discover you're a character in a dream, and if this elderly coma patient dreaming about you wakes up, you'll cease to exist. As a kid, and long before I took mind-altering drugs, this all seemed completely feasible. What I did start to notice reading through these old books is I'd left myself notes. There was these endearing little scribbles on which pathways to take, written in my scrappy little 8-year-old handwriting. Things like, drive off cliff, or the more sinister, get eaten by dinosaur. These notes is where the spark for this talk ignited. Imagine if past you had left notes in the margin for future you, telling you what to do. Fast forward to 2024, and I found myself stepping into a role with no playbook. I'd worked on accessibility within design systems for years, but I'd never had a dedicated accessibility role, and Just Eat had never had an accessibility specialist. Like in my Choose Your Own Adventure books, I thought I'd rely on my notes in the margin from my years in design systems to try and navigate this new challenge. If you've ever attended a writing workshop, you might be familiar with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. As this talk is about choosing your own adventure, I am borrowing Campbell's 3-act story structure, starting with the call to adventure, journeying down the road of trials to return with the elixir. Starting with Act 1, the call to adventure. Though in my case, a more accurate description might be, let's get lost together, because I am nothing if not inclusive. In the first 6 months of my new accessibility role, the skills I learned in design systems have helped me decide on a direction, plan a route, and work out how to measure progress. I'm going to run through each of these, starting with decide on a direction, because every good explorer needs a map. First, I needed to understand the problems I was facing so I could plan my route ahead. When I worked as a UX designer on design systems, I solved problems using design thinking. I was no longer in a design role, but I thought I would tackle the discovery stage of my new job using some models from my trusty design thinking toolbox. The first thing I did was build out a stakeholder map of my core direct and indirect stakeholders. This helped me understand who the key players were in my new org and where my circle of influence extended. I did a gap analysis. I spoke to 60 stakeholders and asked everyone the same 3 questions. What's the current state of accessibility in your product or feature? Where would you like it to be, and what's the gap? From there, I identified some problems and turned them into how might we statements. This is my favorite design thinking exercise because it reframes problems as questions. It helps you to explore a wide range of opportunities before rushing in with an obvious solution. Design thinking is such a cool way of solving problems that I think it should be taught in schools. I ran some workshops at a central London secondary school where we designed apps to solve a problem in our local community, and we did it all with Sharpies and paper. We used design thinking models like empathy maps to understand our users better and did some journey mapping to identify where our product might be useful to them. None of this is particularly groundbreaking, but it shows how the design thinking skills you learn on a design system can be applied to any problem, whether you're making stuff with a bunch of kids or figuring out a new job. The note I'd leave to my future self in the margin would be, solve problems using the tools you have. So I had an understanding of the structure of my new org and the problems I was facing. The next step was planning a route to map the course of my new adventure. Many design systems kick off with workshopping of vision and principles to guide strategy and direction. A vision should be ambitious, and principles should reflect your values and set out how you're going to act. Marianne highlighted the importance of principles earlier on today and suggested circling back round to yours if they don't reflect your current values. In a big systems team, having someone raise an eyebrow and say, "Oh, are we really doing the hard work up front to make it easy for our users," or whatever principle you've set yourself, it holds everyone accountable, and I like that. So I use my years of experience in shaping design systems to write my own vision and principles. People might scoff at this exercise for a team of one, but in the absence of team members, I needed words to help me or to hold me accountable to my mission. Road mapping. As a design lead on a systems team, writing a vision and principles was well within my comfort zone, but roadmaps were a different story. When I worked on a design system, the roadmap was often a list of outputs, like this example from Pi, our design system at Just Eat, to research, design, and build the components that consuming teams needed and to support them. I'd never had to make an accessibility roadmap from scratch, so I looked to some experts for inspiration. I got recommended an O'Reilly book called Product Roadmaps Relaunched, which was helpful. As a designer, it can feel like part of your soul leaves your body when you open a book about product roadmaps. But sometimes I just have to take a long, hard look at myself, realize I am a grown-up, and just make a freaking roadmap. The most important thing I learned about roadmaps is to always consider your audience and present the level of detail that would be meaningful to them. If you present your roadmap to different people, you might need to set it out differently. Focus on the outcomes, not the outputs, and align your roadmap to a higher level business goal. My advice here is probably eye-rollingly obvious to anyone in product management, but starting this new job, road mapping was all new to me. My notes in the margin here. If you're a designer or an engineer working on a design system, you're likely surrounded by folks with product management and planning expertise. Make the most of this. Get involved in road mapping and learn from the pros. The dark arts of JIRA are highly transferable and could be invaluable in a future role. Yeah, looking back, I kind of wished I'd paid a bit more attention in some of those product meetings, rather than secretly looking at raccoon TikTok. The next stop on my adventure was working out how I was going to measure progress. As a disclaimer, I have dyscalculia, so I don't bring a lot of measurement skills to the table. For context, I once ordered an 11-centimeter bathroom blind. Turns out that's quite small. And 100 kilograms of wild bird food, which turns out when a truck delivers it is quite a lot. Based on these credentials, you are welcome to wholeheartedly disagree with the opinion on metrics I'm about to share, which is you cannot accurately quantify the return on investment of a design system. Hallelujah. In every design system I've worked on, the business inevitably asks, what's the ROI? How much money has the design system saved us this year? I've noticed that podcasts and talks about measurement are always really popular because we as explorers are seeking the holy grail, some magic metric to measure the monetary ROI of a design system. But that metric doesn't exist. Components alone have limited value, and once they're integrated into a product, their value gets diluted and absorbed by the complexity of the entire product infrastructure. In a design system, we measure things like the number of components we've built, products or teams using components or contributions we've received. These are useful measures for the team to see progress, but no matter which way you bend them, none of these will accurately tell you how much money the design system has saved the company without being a massive guesstimate. As Diane said in her talk yesterday, these figures are created by product people using some dark magic. For me, the return on investment isn't about a monetary figure anyway. It's about outcomes like building future scale, cross-team collaboration, increasing speed to market, and creating a cohesive brand. Being asked what is the return on investment for accessibility seems even more of a stretch. Last month, I had the pleasure of joining Ben Callahan on his fantastic podcast, The Question. Woo! We asked the wider design systems community how they measure accessibility in their product and in their design system. Unsurprisingly, there is no magic metric here either. In fact, 27% of the 60 people who pitched in said they don't measure product accessibility at all. The teams that do measure accessibility suggested metrics like tracking the number of technical fails, scores from automated testing tools like Axe or Lighthouse, and for apps, comparing the number of users with accessibility settings enabled to other metrics like conversion rates. This is something we've been looking at Just Eat. If you download an app and agree to the terms, you can see if you have accessibility settings enabled on your device. As Hayden said yesterday, we can't make any assumptions about users based on these settings. They don't infer that someone has a disability, just that they have a preference for consuming apps in a certain way. We record a significant number of user sessions with accessibility settings enabled, so should be designing and building with those users' needs in mind. Do users with accessibility settings convert? Do they spend more or less than other users? This maybe gets you closer to a metric the business might care about. Everyone on Ben's call agreed the most impactful metric is getting the CEO to watch one blind customer struggle to use their product with a screen reader. That experience is worth more than any ROI chart. What are the notes in the margin here? Be realistic about imperfect measurements when that's all you have, and stop apologizing for not delivering metrics that don't exist. What matters is using the data you have to drive meaningful change. I'm here to champion users with disabilities and impairments, advocating for their best possible experience. Whatever metrics help me to achieve that are good enough. So we've made it through Act 1 relatively unscathed. We've taken up the call to adventure, planned our route, made a map, and scoped out some mediocre forms of measurement. Join me for Act 2, where we set off down the road of trials. At this point in the hero's journey, we typically meet a wise mentor to illuminate the path. My first job on a design system was at Lloyds Bank, and during those formative years, my design systems guide was Nathan Curtis. Where are you, Nathan? Oh, can we all please give Nathan a round of applause for the number of times he did your spike in the sprint with one of these articles. Amy Hupe and I recorded a podcast with zeroheight where we went back to design systems school. Every episode, whether we were researching tokens, versioning, or governance, was just completely bossed by some piece of Nathan Curtis pillar content. So what do you do when you start a new job and there's no mentor, no Nathan Curtis article telling you how to do your job? Amy had plenty of quotable moments in this podcast, but this one really set me on my journey. Be the Nathan Curtis you want to see in the world. With no mentor at hand, it was up to me to trailblaze my own path along the road of trials. In Act 2, we'll learn to speak the language of the people, then bring folks along with us for the journey. Starting with speaking the language of the people, over my years in design systems, I've learned to stop writing for myself and learned to start writing for my users. Natalie covered this off nicely in her talk this morning, learning to tell the story so your users see the value. The user onboarding Super Mario power-up analogy always comes to mind here. Consumers don't care about your product, they just care about the uplift it gives them. If we can reframe this for design systems, consumers don't care that you've just spent the last month handcrafting 170 button variations in Figma. They just want a flipping button. In my first systems role, my manager used to print out my long, turgid team update emails detailing everything the design systems team had worked on that month and write, "Why would I care?" and big red pen across the top. This might sound harsh, but it was the best feedback I ever received because this question echoes in my head every time I write. No one cares what the design system team does, they just care about how it makes their job easier. Learning to communicate the consumer uplift in short, targeted comms while working on a design system is a highly transferable skill. As a nerd, another valuable written communication skill I gained from my time in design systems was learning to write component specs and technical docs. What makes good technical documentation? For me, it's clarity, so written in plain language that's easy to follow. It must be concise and relevant for users in both location and content. For process, I lent heavily on diataxis, which is a systemic approach to authoring technical docs. It breaks down documentation into 4 distinct types: tutorials, how-to guides, reference guides, and explanation. This circles back around to knowing your user and the type of documentation they need to solve their problem at that moment. In my accessibility role, these research and technical writing skills have proved a huge asset. One of my first tasks was advising on the implications of the European Accessibility Act for Just Eat. Being able to read long, complex documents and present them in a way that your user understands is a highly transferable skill. My notes in the margin here: use your time on a design system to master writing for your user. Simplify the complex, choose the right format, and always lead with the win. The next step on the road of trials is bringing people along on the road trip. In keeping with our adventure theme, I'll kick off with my favorite Hunter S. Thompson quote. "I'm feeling a little lightheaded. Maybe you should drive." In this stop on our journey of discovery, we're going to look at the tactics of design systems sales and politics, starting with the never-ending job of selling systems. Like it or not, in a design system, you are always selling something. I've never worked in sales, so I Googled whether salespeople use methodologies to sell stuff in the same way that I apply design thinking models to my work. Turns out one of the most popular sales methodologies is called SPIN. This stands for situation, problem, implication, need, payoff. Let's apply this model to selling a design system. The situation. The need for a design system often arises when your digital products lack cohesion, are slow to build and maintain. The problem? This is probably because you're managing 20 siloed code repos, each serving up 1,500 variations of a primary button. The implication? Takes 2 years to bring anything to market, and your products look like a bit of a shit show. The need payoff? You need a design system. I made that sound really simple, but each stage of the sales process probably involved a lot of drama, crying, diagrams, and multiple PowerPoint presentations featuring made-up charts showing design systems ROI. Once the system is up and running, you'll need to repeat this process to get teams on board. Empathize with their situation, understand their problems, outline the implications of not adopting the system, and convince them of the payoff if they do. You might have to tailor your pitch to each team based on their priorities. And the selling doesn't stop once they're using the system. You have to keep reselling the idea to maintain engagement. Look at you all. You went into design systems thinking you'd be dragging a few rectangles around, and you've come out the other side fully fledged salespeople. Yeah, feel free to tag yourself in that one. My notes in the margin here. To succeed in systems, you must become a master of effective persuasion. Learn to sell the wins. In my role as an accessibility specialist, I'm constantly selling accessibility at every level. Embrace the sales experience a design system offers. It is a highly transferable skill. The last stop on the road of trials is design systems politics. Every job has politics, but I feel like design system is particularly contentious because you sit at the intersection of design, engineering, product, and management. The political fallout I've experienced in design systems has typically been around ownership and governance, adoption, then contribution and updates, the complexity of cross-functional collaboration and managing resistance to change, and the cultural shift needs to get on board. Basically everything then. Effectively, all of this just comes down to one thing, and that's change. It's easy to see a design system as its artifacts, the component libraries and tools, but ultimately they're about organizational change. If you want people to change their ways of working, you will encounter politics. And let's be honest, smug people of design systems, when it comes to product design, we know best. Through a twilight lens, the design system is basically the Volturi. We look scathingly at your poor, uninformed coding choices, crushing your hopes and dreams with our pedantic design rules. And these opinions aren't always what consuming teams want to prioritize or have time to care about. We haven't talked about the music for this road trip, but if I could suggest a playlist from my Now That's What I Call Design Systems mixtape, our greatest hits would be, those icons need a text label. That button doesn't have sufficient color contrast. No, you can't have a 15.5 pixel heading just because it looks good in that one instance, and more. In design systems, it always felt like I was navigating the politics of being on a team that everyone agrees is necessary in principle, but can't be bothered to engage with because of the amount of change required. This has served me incredibly well in accessibility. People love the idea of accessibility, but the reality, changing workflows, integrating pipeline testing, or adding a shitload of audit fail tickets into their sprint is just a lot more work that they haven't accounted for. Rather amusingly, if you look on the National Careers page on gov.uk, the list of skills they suggest you need to become a politician is basically a job spec for working on a design system. Skills include analytical thinking and active listening, attention to detail, persistence and determination, and my favorite, to be able to use a computer and the main software packages competently. Looking at you here, Figma. What are my notes in the margin here? All jobs have politics, but design systems offer a masterclass. Building relationships, gaining buy-in, ensuring transparency, demonstrating value, and ultimately navigating the politics of change are just some of the highly transferable skills you take away. And if you have aspirations to use these skills to become a UK politician, crack on! The country would benefit from your skill set, or really from any functioning adult. So we faced the trials on the road by learning to speak the language, then invited folks along for the trip. The third act in the hero's journey is called Return with the Elixir. After 8 years of design systems adventures, I think the fundamental skill I've returned with is simply thinking in systems. Because design systems has the word system in it, we automatically equate this with systems thinking, but a lot of what we do is actually analytical thinking. Watching Ben's amazing talk yesterday, we've clearly fallen down the same rabbit hole of Russell Ackoff talks during our time on design systems. They are a very enlightening watch. Ackoff talks about how analytical thinking is zooming into the small details, taking things apart to see how they work. In the case of design systems, we reduce a product to its smallest parts, the components and tokens, fine-tuning these individual parts for functionality, usability, and accessibility. Systems thinking is where we zoom out to see how these small parts function within a larger system, helping us understand why things work the way they do. The design systems fit within the organization, the product infrastructure, strategy, and the company culture. I'm thinking maybe if analytical thinking and systems thinking hooked up and had a baby, it might be called design systems thinking. Systems thinking helps maintain a long-term vision for the design system's evolution, while analytical thinking ensures the implementation is sound and meets user needs. The reason I think a design system skill set is so unique is because you're constantly switching between these levels of zoom. Regardless of whether you care to give these things a label, for me, thinking in systems is the elixir, the superpower you gradually develop while working on a design system. It gives you the ability to zoom into a design and instantly spot styles or patterns that won't scale beyond a single token, screen, pattern, or product. It allows you to zoom out and anticipate the consequences a change will have across the entire product org. And you really need to significantly balls this up at least a couple of times to really earn your Design Systems Explorer badge. So we've nearly reached the end of the road, people. Our adventure has taken us through design thinking, strategy, road mapping, metrics, comms, documentation, sales, politics, and thinking in systems. If you work on a design system, it's time to congratulate yourselves on LinkedIn. I would hire someone with one of these skills, let alone 9. If you'll afford me one final detour on our design systems adventure, I'd like to invite you down a rabbit hole I fell into writing this talk. While immersing myself in the nostalgia of choose your own adventure stories, I found this incredible data-viz project by a designer called Christian Swinehart. Swinehart had created a project that takes my childhood notes in the margin to another level by mapping the pathways of 71 choose your own adventure books as part of an epic data-viz project. If you click into my book Hyperspace, you can see the branching paths of each story mapped out as a tree of decisions, each choice connected to the next. You can explore the implications of every path and every decision. Even if these books don't hold any nostalgia for you, this is a stunning data visualization on an epic scale. It's essentially a design system for the layout of choose your own adventure stories. You can even download the data set in Excel. For 8-year-old adventurer me, this would have been like discovering the secret of hyperspace, a treasure worth running unaccompanied into a creepy old man's house to get my hands on. This is the advanced version of the system I tried to create as a kid. It's like past you leaving future you, notes in the margin on an epic scale. So I set to work rereading these books armed with the spreadsheets. After 3 books, I was bored. It turns out the fun isn't always about making the right choices. As Scott pointed out yesterday, it's in the dopamine hit from the variable reward of not knowing. Knowing where the road will take you in advance and always being guaranteed a win takes away a lot of the fun. Whatever skills you take away from your time in design systems, remember this. Design systems are not about the destination, it's the journey. You might have been thinking up until this stage there was no point to this talk, but thanks to Luke Finch, it's all come together in the end. The incredible people you meet, you nerds. The community, the rabbit holes of discovery that consume you, the highs, the lows, and the endless possibilities you uncover along the way. Your destination might be just the beginning. Thank you.
Geri Reid.
Thank you so much, Geri.